Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to be here indoors on this smoky day. Thank you for tuning in to this very special event as part of our virtual Lit Live series at Village Books. My name is Claire. I'm the event coordinator for Village Books, and I am completely delighted to be hosting this event today. A couple of bits of business. If you're hearing an echo, please make sure that you only have one tab open, one window open in your computer, or put on some headphones, or turn down the volume on your on your computer. That could be a source of echoing. So if you hear an echo, try one of those three things. If one of those three things doesn't work, good luck. I don't know what else to tell you. So a few things about Crowdcast. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a follow button. If you click on that green follow button, you'll get updates about what we're doing at Village Books. You can go straight to our Crowdcast channel where you can see events that are coming up. You can also watch past recorded events, so I encourage you to do that. Also, there's a very important button right there. It says, Purchase Heart of This Family Here. That is a link that takes you straight to the Village Books website that has both of our authors' books for sale at Village Books. We would dearly appreciate if you feel so inspired after today's event that you would like to purchase their books. You can follow that link straight to our website, and we would appreciate your support, as I'm sure the authors would too. And on that, to piggyback on that, while our events so far have been free, I want to thank anyone who made a contribution at registration for this event today. We really do appreciate it as we're embarking on this virtual adventure, and in this strange time, we really do appreciate the support that you have given with your contribution. So thank you very much. Let's see, we have an upcoming event. We're very excited because our tonight's facilitator is also going to be a facilitator for our event on Saturday, September 19th. So we have Cami Ostman here today. We're also going to have her facilitate the conversation with Nancy Canyon on Saturday, September 19th at 6 p.m. They're going to talk about Nancy's brand new book. I'm kicking myself because I don't actually have the book here, but I did print off this very fancy copy of the cover of the book, Celia's Heaven. Nancy Canyon and Cami Ostman are going to be in conversation about Celia's Heaven on Saturday, September 19th at 6 p.m. And I hope that we'll see you there. Let's see, another thing about Crowdcast. So we appreciate all the chats, everybody who's chiming in, saying hello, and we're so happy that you're all here this evening. I am going to let you know that in just a few seconds, I'm going to disable that chat. I will bring it back just in time for the Q&A, so you will have a chance to give some wonderful feedback to our authors and say, well done and hooray and all of that. But just for the duration of the presentation, we are going to go ahead and disable that chat. Maybe I'll just do that now before I forget. I promise we'll bring you back later. If during the course of the conversation with our authors, a question occurs to you and you don't want to forget what you want to ask them, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that it says Ask a Question. If you click on Ask a Question during any time through the course of the event, you can type in your question, close it, and then we're just going to hold the questions there until it's time for Q&A. You can do that at any point in the conversation. It won't disrupt anything at all. So if a question occurs to you that you want to ask our authors, you go ahead and just pop it right into Ask a Question. Okay, I think that means that now we get to the fun part. So I'm going to say a little bit about our authors today. Cami Ostman is the founder of the Narrative Project. It's a 9-month program that helps writers get their books done. She's also the author of the book Second Wind, one woman's midlife quest to run 7 marathons on 7 continents, and the editor of several anthologies. Cami believes that words are powerful, that we create our identities with words, and we tell our truths with words. She holds a Bachelor's of Education in English from Western Washington University and an MS in Marriage and Family Therapy from Seattle Pacific University. She's been profiled in Fitness Magazine, and her books have been reviewed in O Magazine, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. And for our featured author this evening, who I would say I would love to say some wonderful words about our featured author. She is definitely, both of these authors are friends to Village Books, but we see tonight's author at least weekly at Village Books. She is a very friendly, familiar face at Village Books, and I was just telling her in the green room that Village Book staff, we are all fans of this lady. So, a native of New England, Linda Morrow graduated from Syracuse University with a BA in sociology and later earned her MED in guidance and counseling. In her younger life, she raised 3 sons and enjoyed a 35-year career in public school education. In 2013, she and her wife relocated to Bellingham, where she feels fortunate to have been embraced by a supportive and talented community of writers and has learned to value coffee shops, not just for the lattes, but also as places for her daily writing practice. She roots for the Red Sox and the New England Patriots. We might have to have a conversation about that later. She likes walks along the beach and woodland trails, treasures time with her grandchildren, and continues to add books to her to-be-read pile. She's here to discuss her brand new memoir, The Heart of This Family, Lessons in Down Syndrome and Love. So before I bring them on to the stage, Linda wanted to share a special slideshow. So pardon me while I do a little bit of on-screen manipulation here.
If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you. If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again I would spend them with you. But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. I've looked around enough to know you're the one I want to go through time with. If I had a box just for wishes and dreams that had never come true, the box would be empty except for the memory of how they were answered by you. But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. Looked around enough to know you're the one I want to go through time.
Hi, Linda. Wow, what a beautiful slideshow. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I know that Jim Croce song was played at Steve's Celebration of Life. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. Good. Well, this is pretty exciting to be able to be here to be in support of you launching this book. I'm one of the lucky people who got to support you along the way of writing it. And so I'm super thrilled. Thank you for asking me to join you here.
Well, the book wouldn't even exist without you, so thank you.
I don't think that's true, but that's sweet of you to say. Well, I just want to start out by asking you why it felt so important to you to write this book.
I almost felt like I didn't even have a choice. When Steve was 18, he had a serious medical incident and he recovered from that. And we had a bunch of people over at our house in Hanover, New Hampshire. We had a slideshow. It was a real slideshow in a slide cassette and all that. And when it was done that evening, his dad, my husband, said, I think that's the book that you've said you always wanted to write about, Steve. And I think probably he was right. And from at least that point on, I knew that someday I would write it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you did, and it took you about 8 years, isn't that right? It
took me about 8 years. I was incredibly lucky to have landed in Bellingham. I walked into a Village Books presentation being given by this woman that I'd never heard of before, named Laura Kalpakian. She's a well-known author, and she was teaching a class called Memory to Memoir. I signed up for it, and then here I am 8 years later.
There you are, yeah. So it's a really big deal to see your book on the shelf. So congratulations, huge congratulations on that. Let's start from the beginning, and maybe I can just ask you to talk a little bit about how you discovered that Steve had Down syndrome.
Okay. So Steve was born in 1966. It was a pretty typical labor. It was my first child. Back in those days, your husband left you in the waiting room and they led you away and you sort of labored by yourself in a cubicle. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't one of those screaming women, so I did my best to keep quiet. And he was born, and at birth, I remember the doctor saying, well, he's a little bit blue and we've got some oxygen just piping into his little bassinet, but not with a mask or anything. I spent 4 days in the hospital, which was pretty typical. Brought him home, and when he was about 2 weeks old, his dad told me he was going to go meet with the pediatrician whom he had not met in the hospital. He had been invited to meet him, and I said, great, sounds like a good idea. He had the meeting, he came home that evening, picked up Steve, started to cry. I said, what's the matter? He said, oh, I'm just so happy we have this little boy. Great. And Steve's baby checkup wasn't scheduled for at least 8 weeks. The day of the baby checkup, Raj went with me. Somewhat atypical, but he was a really involved dad right from the get-go. And the doctor examined him and said, okay, let's meet in my office. As we were walking in, Raj said, let me hold Steve. So I said, okay. I sat down. Raj and Steve were behind me, and the doctor looked up at me and said, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your baby's a little mongoloid idiot. Mm-hmm. And that's how I found out.
Yeah, I remember the first time that I ever read that scene in your book, how struck I was at the doctor announcing that in that way and using that term.
Yeah.
And then I know this book really walks us through the beginning of Steve's life all the way through to the end of his life, and your journey and Roger's journey too, and your other kids with him.
Right.
That really set you and your late ex-husband on a path that you didn't know you were going to need to go on. So can you talk a little bit about some of the roadblocks that you faced, some of the hardest roadblocks in trying to support Steve as he was growing up to have a full and vibrant life? You know, he was born in 1966, so most of his youth years would have been in the 70s and early 80s.
Right.
So what were some of those roadblocks?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things, even now when I look at his baby pictures, like even that first picture in the slideshow, I think to myself, how could you not have known? But the truth is that you didn't see people with Down syndrome back in the 60s. They were all institutionalized. And when I was told, there were two things he told me. First, that I had this baby, and I corrected said, I know that's not the right term. He switched to Down syndrome. He also said that we could take him home, do the best we could, but it was unlikely that Steve would outlive his teens. And that, more than almost the diagnosis, was what stuck with me. I wanted to know more about Down syndrome, but there was nothing. I mean, I think I might have looked in an encyclopedia, but that would have been about it. I just could not get any information whatsoever. And in a sense, maybe that was a blessing, because I just figured he was a little baby and I was going to do the best that I could. Early on, I had the support of a very, very dear friend, a high school friend who we've known each other virtually our entire lives. So we've known each other for 80 years. And Jane and another friend whose name is Jan, those two believed in me right from the get-go and just kept telling me I could do it. So initially, there weren't really any roadblocks. When Jane said, why don't you enroll him in a nursery school? I said, oh, okay. And I met with the director of a nursery school, and she said yes, and he went to nursery school there for 2 years. And then we moved. We left my hometown of Marshfield, Mass, and moved to Long Island, and then things started to change.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like at the very beginning, without any knowledge about how Down syndrome might have affected him, he was a baby to you. It wasn't really until you needed to start engaging in education and you started to discover some of his challenges that things got dicier for you. And I know you have a reading that you're going to offer us here in a minute that will sort of explain that a little bit. I was just reflecting too when you were talking, like, oh right, we didn't have the internet back then. So when you said encyclopedia, I was thinking, oh right. I mean, that would have been where you went to discover what something was. It wasn't like you could just hop on your phone and search for it. Right.
And it's, some of it is the luck of the draw. There certainly were parent groups that had been started. National organizations were in effect then, but if you didn't live in an area where you could find people that were connected to that, there was no way that you knew about it.
Yeah.
He was seen at a birth defects clinic. I asked for information there. They didn't have any.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we left Marshfield, Mass, when Steve was almost 5, that I began to hit roadblocks. And I also, at that time, that was the first time I ever met a parent of another little boy with Down syndrome.
Right. Yeah, I remember reading that scene.
So that's pretty remarkable. That doesn't happen these days.
Right. Yeah, totally. Do you want to read the section that you prepared for us?
Yeah. This is from a chapter that I called Acronym Land, and it's 1971. I'm referred to in the chapter as Mrs. Cohen because at that point I'd taken my husband's name, and I'm on the phone with the secretary from the Port Jefferson, New York school district, and we've recently moved to this little Long Island town. So she opens up, Mrs. Cohen, I have the kindergarten registration form for your son, Stephen, in front of me. Your son isn't eligible to enter kindergarten at our school. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding? Misunderstanding? What was this woman talking about? The receptionist cleared her throat. We don't enroll children with your son's problem in our school system. Problem? Immediately, I felt annoyed. Steve wasn't a problem. He was just a little kid. I don't understand. He's had 2 years of nursery school, and he knows his colors, and he can count it. Mrs. Cohen, please, the voice interrupted. Under special concerns, you wrote your son has Down syndrome. If your son has Down syndrome, he's retarded. The disembodied voice droned on. Our schools don't accept retarded children. We have a separate, centralized program for those children. Our superintendent has instructed me to provide you with the contact information for the district BOCES office. Would you like their phone number? A dull ache formed in my stomach. This couldn't be true. A separate program, like racial segregation? I struggled to respond. BOCES? What's that? BOCES, she replied crisply. It's the acronym we use for the Board of Cooperative Educational Services. Why don't you call them? I'm sure someone will be happy to talk to you about the program. So 2 weeks later, I sat in an upholstered wing chair facing Dr. Richard Levine, PhD. Dr. Levine reached for the file folder lying on his gleaming oak desk and pulled out the registration form I'd filled out for Steve, glanced at it briefly, and looked up at me through thick, wandering glasses. Oh, you live in Port Jefferson, I see. Nice little town. Yes, we moved there earlier this summer from Massachusetts. My husband, Dr. Roger Cohen, has his PhD in sociology. Would citing Roger's official status buy me some credibility, strengthen my female voice, and make it heard? Dr. Levine stared at me. Your son, Stephen. He'll be 5 in September. When did he first begin receiving EI services? EI services? Dr. Levine looked up. Early intervention. When did early intervention services begin? Oh, you mean his heart catheterization. That was done when he was... My inquisitor cut me off. No. EI services. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. My stomach ached. I felt so stupid. He's never had any of those things, I said. But he is up to date on all his shots. Dr. Levine shook his head and frowned. It says here that your son, Steve, attended a nursery school for 2 years. This was a SPED school, I assume? SPED? Special education. Was this a nursery school for retarded children? No, I said meekly, just a regular nursery school. Dr. Levine shifted in his chair, leaned forward, and began delivering a rapid-fire speech about the history of the BOCES program and its operation. I tried hard to focus. Obviously, he'd given this speech many times. We provide cost-effective educational services for our towns, including the education of all retarded children. We rent space available from towns in each district. We have both TMR and EMR classes, beginning with preschool programs. My eyes blinked as I tried to follow. What the hell is he talking about? My ignorance embarrassed me. Excuse me, Dr. Levine. I apologize for interrupting you, but TMR, EMR, what do those letters stand for? Dr. Levine's eyebrows rose in disbelief. I slumped in my chair. Trainable, mentally retarded, and educable, mentally retarded. Let's see. Yes, your son is Down syndrome. Most of our Down children are EMR. However, we'll have to evaluate your son to be certain. Dr. Levine stood up. I have another appointment scheduled, but I'll ask my receptionist to set up a meeting with a BOCES evaluator. She'll explain the testing process your son will undergo. Then he led me out of his office and deposited me in front of the receptionist desk. I felt as though I'd just been through the spin cycle of a washing machine and stood off to one side, dazed, defeated, not sure what to do next.
Yeah. You know, what I love about that reading, Linda, is the way that it illustrates so many things. First of all, that there was a language that you didn't even know existed that you had to learn basically from scratch. And also that there were a lot of assumptions that people made about Steve before ever even meeting him because he fit into a category.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Years and years and years later, I look back on that and think, in a way, I feel like I had a gift that he didn't receive any of those early intervention services. I know that today, those start practically from birth, actually. And I think they're helpful. but they also put any family on a pretty regimented schedule. And if there are other kids in the picture right away, they get shunted to the side a little bit because so much is focused on this new little infant. So Steve didn't have him, and he turned out fine.
Yeah. Right. Well, and you part of that is because you and Roger really engaged and tried to figure out what could be done, what couldn't be done, and you invented a lot of new things along the way. I mean, I know that we didn't even talking about this, but throughout Steve's life, you basically had to create things for him lots and lots of times.
That's true, but one of the things I think that was so helpful was that he had two younger brothers, and from the time they were little, I mean, they didn't know any different. They always grew up with Steve, but they always had his back. They always included him in things, including when he was an adult, taking him to Las Vegas and making sure he got his beers and that sort of thing. But so that was really helpful. And then eventually, federal legislation kicked in, and this law, Public Law 94-142, was passed in the mid-70s. And finally, there was a federal mandate that said these kids have to be educated in public schools in the least restrictive environment possible. That changed a lot.
Right. I have a note to ask you where you did find support, but I know that it was hard to find at the beginning, and also that Steve wasn't able to go to school with his brothers for much of his life.
Right. It wasn't until he was almost 11 that Roger had a year sabbatical from where he was working on Long Island. We could basically live anywhere. His only requirement was that he had to have access to the New York Times and be near a college research facility. And we ended up settling in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is the home of Dartmouth College. And there, for the very first time, Steve was included in the local elementary school. Interestingly enough, although he was almost 11, he ended up being placed with a teacher who taught first grade. Again, that would never happen today.
Right.
We were delighted, and he actually stayed with her for 2 years. Physically, he was pretty close in size, and it wasn't until his third year at the school, when by now he's almost 14 and he's beginning to go through puberty, then it became obvious that he no longer fit there. And then we had another problem, because where would he go next?
Right. It wasn't like there was a classroom available for him. It had to be figured out every step of the way. And you also had two other kids that you needed to support. How did you balance that advocacy for Steve and being a mom of your two other sons? I mean, I imagine that was quite a bit to juggle.
It was. Sometimes we left Steve behind. I can remember going on a weekend camping trip in the White Mountains, and we found somebody to come and stay with Steve so that Mike and Josh and another family, we could all go overnight camping and hiking. Steve, there was no such thing. Well, that Special Olympics had started, but again, it wasn't easy to find. Mm-hmm. But Steve was a great cheerleader. He went to all his brothers' soccer games. Mike and Josh also did a lot of skiing, and oftentimes we would find a sitter for Steve, and we would take the boys skiing. We traveled to places out west. It was always hard to leave him behind, but there was also a certain amount of relief in just being able to operate as a typical family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a lot of complexity for you on this journey, right? I was, as you were talking, and I'm not sure why, I was just remembering the scene when when Steve and Heather, got married.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess why I was thinking about it is, in terms of support, Jane's kids, he may not have always, there may not have always been a classroom for him to hop into in school, but you did such a great job of providing community for him. And, and then balancing that community for him and the rest of the family with trying to be a family and make sure that the other kids got some adventures too.
It's interesting you bring up the marriage thing, because today, I think many parents of kids born with Down syndrome or other developmental disabilities or physical disabilities, marriage is very much a possibility in their minds. And there are many individuals with developmental challenges who do get married, and of course they should. That and finding appropriate housing with supports if they need it, getting folks who want to into the competitive job arena. Those are the kinds of battles that parents are facing today. Although there are still some schools that will try to include kids or not include them and push them to the side, or feel that they can't function in regular education courses, and that's just not true.
Yeah. I was really struck in reading your book every time I read it. That Steve and his journey was really a teacher for you in so many ways in your life. And so I wonder if you could just touch on what Steve taught you about two things in particular: tenacity and diversity.
Well, I was raised in the 50s. Little girls had very different roles that they were supposed to follow. And I think one of the things that I learned from Steve was that I had to speak up, that I had to make my voice heard. Yeah. And he was very much like that himself. He was not willing to be placed on the sidelines, and he would make sure that his voice was heard. So finding my own voice and speaking up, for sure. As far as diversity goes, Steve never saw himself as a person with Down syndrome. There were times I used to try to have that conversation with him, but it wasn't anything that he was interested in hearing about. He didn't see himself as different, and therefore I really couldn't either, even though there were, certainly stares directed at him and stuff like that. But then as Steve became a teenager, I began to realize some things about myself that put me in a place where I was part of a minority group, and that was understanding more about my sexuality and realizing that I was attracted to women. I was not attracted to men. And Roger and I were divorced. That was really hard on me. I didn't want to hurt him. Hard on Roger because he didn't understand. Definitely hard on our sons, particularly my youngest son, Josh, who was still at home. My middle son, Mike, was away at school, and Steve's comment about divorce was he knew what it was. It meant we had a big fight. And he said, no, that's not really true. But that was he just sort of moved on. But it was hard. It was hard for Josh. It was hard for me. And I didn't know any other lesbians. I thought I was the only one. So for a long time, I didn't really want to be out or call attention to me. And even in writing this book, I tried really hard to avoid that.
I know. I know. It was definitely a journey for you, a continuing journey to find your own voice, right? Not only in life with Steve and as a mom, but yeah, and then, finding your way to your own truth. But then even in the writing of the book, sort of that sense of like, okay, well, how much do I need to show my own journey here? Or can this just be about Steve? And really, in the end, this book is every bit as much about your journey as the heroine of this book, as the storyteller growing and changing as it is about Steve and his life.
I don't know why I ever thought you could write a memoir and not have it be about yourself, but for a long time I wanted to believe that.
No, that's so great though that you really found your way, and
I found my way, and I found an amazing woman who I've now been with for 30 years. We had, first we had to figure out what to call each other, and we decided girlfriends wasn't really what we were talking about, so we settled on partner.
Yeah.
Then we got civil unioned, and then we finally were able to get married. For a while, when we wanted to buy a house, we were tenants in common so that we could both own the house together. But Sue was also in education and was more in the administrative part of it. And when I decided that I wanted to move out of classroom teaching and get into administration, she was the one who really mentored me through that. And that took me out of the classroom. I, in some ways, really, really missed it. I discovered that my skin wasn't as thick as I thought it was. And in the end, that had its own challenges. But
yeah,
if it hadn't been for Sue, I never would have gotten there either. So,
right. Yeah, a gift in your life.
Yeah.
Turns out you don't have to have thick skin to be a strong person. Right?
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
I know you have another reading that you wanted to offer us. Would this be time to do that?
Sure. This one sort of addresses some of the challenges I found as an administrator. And again, I think people have to realize that women in administration, that didn't happen overnight. That was a long path. Some of the feedback I got included feedback from a teacher that I worked with when I was an associate principal, and her feedback said, I could never understand why there weren't more women principals, because all the teachers, for the most part, were female. So she was right. But in this excerpt, it's called Taking Flight, and I've just finished my first year as a principal of a small K-8 school in rural Vermont. It's the summer of 1995, and I'm at a board meeting with the school board members, and the meeting's being facilitated by the school board chair, whose name is Logan Hutchinson, and he's a Mormon elder and holds some pretty conservative views. So the first item on the agenda concerned the newly created middle school paraeducator's position. The previous fall, a handful of male students had been so disruptive that the board had approved an emergency teacher-assisted position to help stabilize behavior. Now, although behavior had greatly improved over the course of the school year, a decision had been made to make the position a permanent one, and by law, that meant that the position had to be advertised. My job over the past weeks had been to review applications, check references, interview several candidates, and provide the board with 2 finalists. I've been glad when Kathy, the individual who'd filled the position for the past school year, told me she wanted to continue. As the second finalist, I selected a young man fresh out of college who'd done his student teaching in a neighboring high school. Hutch asked me to review the qualifications of each candidate for the board. I offered my observations and told the board why I believed Kathy to be the best fit for the job. I stressed the importance of continuity and her proven success with these students. But Hutch surprised me by refusing to accept my recommendation. He wanted to wait until Superintendent Hull arrived. I sat stunned. As a building administrator, this hire was my responsibility, not the superintendent's. Several weeks earlier, a friend told me about a comment he'd overheard Hutch make at a party they'd both attended. Hutch had stated he was determined to rid my school of lesbians, end quote. I tried to dismiss the comment as gossip, but now, knowing Hutch was well aware of Kathy's sexual orientation as well as mine, a cold lump settled in my stomach. I could feel the jurisdiction, which came with my position, eroding like the banks of a swollen river. Once Dr. Hull arrived, Hutch tilted back in his chair, scratched the stubble on his chin, and raised the faded visor of his ever-present cap. Linda's nominated 2 finalists to the board, he reported to the superintendent. Although she prefers Kathy, I think we need more men in the school. I propose we hire the young guy. My shoulders slumped with resignation. I knew his decision had nothing to do with the best interests of students or teachers. Dr. Hull nodded his agreement. How could this be happening again? The meeting ended around midnight, and once home, I fell into bed empty and numb. Again, I'd been rendered powerless, my voice silenced by the patriarchy. This tape was a familiar one. A doctor calling my son a mongoloid idiot, a school official deciding how Steve's needs could best be met, now a superintendent and a school board chair telling me who to hire. The next morning, several upset teachers crowded into my office. Word had gotten out about the board's decision. They couldn't understand why I hadn't supported Kathy. I explained I had recommended her, but the final decision rested with the board. I knew my credibility as a leader had just taken a major hit. I'd let down not only the teachers, but Kathy as well. But Hutch's candidate had interviewed with several other principals and ended up accepting a certified teacher's position at a different school. Hutch was not happy. He told me he wanted to advertise the opening again, and he didn't want me involved. Instead, he formed a committee consisting of teachers who'd be working with the middle school students. He directed them to handle the screening and interviews of the applicants and to bring 2 candidates to the board. Whatever. I was happy to step out of what had now become an emotionally charged process. I did my best to bury my apprehension about Hutch's obvious homophobia. Maybe everything would work out. When Kathy's name appeared as a finalist a second time, Hutch again spurred the recommendation. He added 2 community members to the committee. The Enhanced Committee still picked Kathy as their top choice. But Hutch refused to give up. The opening of the school year was 2 days away when he walked into my office. He told me he'd convened an unscheduled board meeting the previous night, and the board had decided not to accept the committee's decision. We're going to re-interview every applicant ourselves, he told me. Please let the teachers know. I gulped. Indignation filled every fiber of my body. This marked the 3rd time Hutch had opposed Kathy's nomination. His behavior was outrageous. It was sexist, disrespectful, and wrong. A shiver shook me. I'd reached my limit. I rose out of my office chair and exclaimed, I can't continue to work like this. What you've done is illegal. You held a board meeting without notification. You can't operate unilaterally like that. I gathered steam. This isn't your private school to run as you see fit. I'm not delivering your message to the teachers. Do it yourself. I took a deep breath before adding, I can't work with you, Hutch. Maybe I should just quit. Hutch's beefy face reddened and he stomped out. The room spun, my ears roared. Everything I'd worked for the past 14 months dissolved behind tear-clouded eyes. I grabbed my purse and car keys and walked out of the building. Just as I'd done so many times before when faced with adversity, I fled.
Yeah. Wow. You fled, but I know that you continued in the fight. There's more to the story. Like this was. I wanted to say to people who are watching, I really believe that your book is the story of a kind of a quiet heroine who keeps pressing. And for me, anyway, Linda, knowing your story, settles inside of me as an example of how to face adversity and to know that you can do hard things. You can keep doing them. You know, super encouraging.
It takes a long time to figure that out.
Oh, well.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, I'm following your new footsteps. I want to just remind people of a couple of things. I have one more question for you. But I want to remind people that they can purchase the book by pushing the purchase Heart of This Family button, and also that they can ask questions, because we're going to open space for some questions and answers. So there is an ask a question button also at the bottom of people's screens. So people who want to have to ask Linda something, just pop that question down there, and then I will open that box, and in a couple of minutes we'll have you answer a few of those, if that's okay, Linda.
Yep, that'd be great. Yeah. I'd like to do that.
So, you know, as you were just reading that that bit, I could feel the emotion in you, and I could feel myself getting sort of, you know, angry at that scenario. And I've read it before too, how frustrating that situation was for you. And I wonder for you what it was like to have to relive everything, and to write this book, and to get into the scenes, and to get deeper into the scenes with revisions, just sort of that whole reliving process that you do when you write a memoir. What was that like?
Hard, scary, emotional. Probably that scene I just read was one of the more difficult ones. And, you know, I can, like anybody else, I can look back and know that there were many, many different ways I could have handled it and come out more of a winner than I did. But I survived that, and I was fortunate. I ended up being able to, after a couple of years, reboot my career and end on a real high note, and that was very important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. See, and I think you're hard on yourself, because I think that there were a lot of pressures coming in from a lot of different places and lots of transitions, and I think that's really represented in your book, just how many different things settle onto a person in life, and how, you know, that can crush you for a period of time, and then you can get back up again and reboot, like you said.
I mean, I know that there are plenty of women, and there are also plenty of men who are in leadership positions, and you've got people coming from all different angles, and you're juggling all these balls up in the air at the same time. You have a lot of information that you can't always share.
Yeah.
It takes a certain individual to be able to hold those kinds of positions. I think there's a lot of support now, and I also know that that's not a position that I ever want to be in again.
Right. Well, I think that life with Steve sort of, you know, built you to the place where you could handle some of those things in your career later on. We have a couple questions here. You feel like you want to answer some of our audience questions? Awesome.
Yes, I do. Yep.
Okay. So one question here from Dick, not Dick Little, Dick Cathell. He says, as a father of a 52-year-old daughter with CP, cerebral palsy, I'm guessing, I am aware of the amount of emotional and physical energy it takes in being a caring parent. You said you got away from time to time. Were there any daily or weekly self-care routines that you found helpful for your own health? Yeah. How'd you keep breathing week after week after week?
You know, again, self-care wasn't really a term I was familiar with, particularly when I was still living in the house. But I did run, and I got out. Sometimes it was 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it was 5 o'clock at night. For a long time, it had to be when either Raj was around, or as Steve got older and his brothers got older, one of them would make sure that they were home so I could get out for a run. But again, it would have been great if I had seen a therapist at that point in time.
Yeah.
But that
Wasn't on your radar.
well, that came with a lot of baggage and a lot of shame, and so it was running was my release for the most part.
Yeah. Right. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Right. There's another question here. I think this question actually is really interesting to me. Could you speak about what you learned about yourself from the actual writing of the book? Were there some surprises or realizations along the way? This is from Susan Rednick. I love this question because I've always contended that when you write a memoir, you're part of what you're doing is you're bringing definition to your experience, and you really do discover things about yourself through the writing. You know, you think when you start that you know perhaps what you will be saying, but then when you get into the middle of it, new things emerge. So I'd be curious to know what emerged. What did you learn about yourself as you were writing?
Well, I remember, I don't know if this is exactly the answer to the question, but I would say sometime in the last 2 years, I was able to forgive the pediatrician who withheld his knowledge, his diagnosis from me, and also told my husband not to tell me. And I'd held that against him for a very, very long time. And it was at some point during the writing that I realized, wow, I, for 8 weeks, had this absolutely perfect, beautiful baby that I fell in love with. And so I don't think that was his intention, but I realized that he had given me that gift. And, you know, I honestly, sometimes I think if we'd been told at birth, at Steve's birth, and been advised to put Steve in an institution, what would I have done?
Right.
And man, I don't know.
Those 8 weeks might have been a mercy, even though that wasn't maybe what he wasn't planning that out. Right.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what I would have done. I was pretty other directed at that point. So I think that doctors were on a pedestal, and if they had said, do this, I might have done it.
Yeah. You know, when you say other directed, kind of to this question of what if I could guide you a little bit with it, because I was with you on the journey. I remember sometimes when we were coaching or looking at some of your drafts, I would say, but what were you feeling? And you would say, I don't know. I wasn't feeling. I was just doing what I needed to do. And so I wonder, kind of specifically, if you sort of discovered your emotions about some of the things that happened as you were writing, which you maybe didn't even have time to think about back when you were living it.
Yeah, I think that was true. I mean, from the beginning, my writing group, the Tail Spinners, every piece I submitted, the feedback always was, but we don't know what you were feeling. We don't know what you were thinking. So that's something I think I still struggle with a lot. But it did help me. I felt a lot of guilt about some of my reactions with Steve as an adult. I really wanted to be done. Hands-on parenting. I wanted to live my own life, and I knew I couldn't. But that was and still is to some extent hard. But I can look back now. It's been almost 5 years since he died, and I can look back now and tell myself and really believe it that he had a great life. He lived the best life he could have. Living today with the isolation that the pandemic has created. I know so many individuals, and they don't have to be developmentally delayed. I mean, we all are isolated. But for some of the folks that do live on the margins for various reasons, that isolation is crushing.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful that he hasn't had to go through that.
Right. I am so aware of how, just from knowing him through your words, how hard that would have been. You know, one of the things that I'm going to ask one or two more questions here from the question box, but I just wanted to reflect that I think one of the gifts of your book here for parents of anybody, you know, it doesn't have to be a child with special needs or who's differently able, but any parent, is the way that you've held all of the, you know, the things that you consider failures, the way that you did advocate for Steve, that you hold all of that with so much humility and self-reflection. And I think it's going to be a gift to parent. You know, in my work as a therapist, I have parents say to me all the time, like, I just feel so guilty. I feel so guilty. And I often think it's almost like when you give birth to a child, guilt comes along with it. And you have really kind of given a gift here about how to hold all of these complex feelings and still proceed with your own life. I think that is the victory of this book, that it's just you opening up your life to readers to see, look how complicated this can be, and yet, you know, we can still move through it.
Well, and I mean, that's another thing that Steve taught me. So, you know, one of his favorite sayings was, "I teeny bit worried that blah, blah is coming, and I've never done it before." He was always a teeny bit worried when his next birthday came along, but he pretty much lived life in the moment and didn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about the past or the future. And it's a pretty good lesson.
Yeah. Pretty good lesson. Well, there's a question here from Linda Lambert, and I think it kind of leads into one of the last things that we talked about making sure to say. Her question is, how do you reach out to Down syndrome children and parents of those children? What hope do you offer? And I know that their proceeds of this book are going to the Steve Cohen Fund. So can you just talk a little bit about that briefly and address Linda's question?
I am always surprised at myself that I'm still so engaged with the Down syndrome community or the disability community in general. And somebody said to me, well, once you're a member of that club, you'll be a member forever. And that's really true. I'm very hopeful. At the same time, I know that, like I said earlier, some of the battles that I fought are still being fought. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot more resources. There's a lot more support. I really believe that it's through our diversity that we become fully human. And this would just be a really boring place if everybody was exactly the same. So
yeah, wouldn't it be? Drag.
As far as the Steve Cohen Fund goes, Stu and I established that after he passed away, and it's administered by the Howard Center, which is located in Burlington, Vermont. It basically helps folks who either are in or want to enter the competitive workforce and they need some financial support. We've paid for things like special box cutters to use for people who are blind. We've helped folks buy uniforms. We've helped individuals take a CPR course or complete a cooking program at a technical school. So it's, in some ways you could say it's nickel and dime stuff, but that's exactly sometimes the thing that makes the biggest difference. We were fortunate. We were always able to give Steve whatever he needed, and including, you know, financial support, but certainly not everybody is in that position. So but I hope that fund will continue to do for ever and ever.
That's great. That's so great. Well, I really hope everybody thank you everyone for joining us today, and really hope that you'll buy this book. You can purchase it with the button below, and know that some of the proceeds are going to the Steve Cohen Fund. And you have a little bracelet on. You want to show us that? Yeah.
Village Books has these. This is the "What Am I?" chop liver bracelet. That was Steve's favorite saying. There's a little insert in the books that talks about how he developed that saying. Pink was his favorite color. Whenever you get down on yourself, just think, no, you're not chop liver.
Yeah, it's good. And I really want people to read this book. You're going to fall in love with Steve and Linda, and really come out at the end with a lot of encouragement. So thank you, Linda, so much. And thank you for inviting me to be here with you. Hi, Claire.
Hi, I'm crashing the end of your party here because I just wanted to say thank you to both of you so much. This was just this was fabulous, and the readings were great. Linda, wow.
Can I get a beer now?
What's up?
Can I go get a beer?
Oh my, please. Well, you're getting all kinds of wonderful accolades in the chat there. I hope you're going to read those. And everybody should know. I see that people are saying that they have already been purchasing the book as they've been watching this. All of the copies that we have are at Village Books have been signed by Linda. And if we run out, we'll order more. And I believe, Linda, you're willing to come in and sign them all, right? Yep. All right. So, gosh, I appreciate everybody who tuned in the audience tonight. I think we had people from all over the place, and what a community of writers. I was looking at the names of the attendees, and boy, this area, we are so spoiled with writers. This is wonderful and so supportive.
It's an amazing group of people.
Yeah. So, gosh, thank you both. Do either of you have any last thing you'd like to say before we?
I just want to say congratulations to Linda for this. I mean, this was a really big deal, and I'm so excited for you. Congratulations.
I want to say thank you to both Cami and Claire. You've been wonderful, and hiding off in the background where you can't see her is my publisher, Lisa Daly of Sidekick Press. And she's been sitting here in case there were any technical issues that were going to send me into orbit. And also hiding someplace is my wife, Sue. And I know that my two sons, Mike and Josh, are watching. I hope I didn't make either of you cry. But if I did, oh well.
All right. On that note, thank you so much, everybody. You can go off and have a lovely evening, and best wishes to everyone.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. Bye-bye.